the resulting wind blows like this. Are we cool with that? This is called the trade wind. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but there was this guy who somebody bought a really fancy wooden boat for, and this guy managed to stay alive in the ocean and got credit for quote-unquote discovering the Americas. But I gotta tell you, if you can work out the surviving at sea part, you can't help but hit the Americas. It's called the trade current. Whether you plan to be a pillaging, raping conquistador of scary motivations, or a very nice person who happens to be out on a sailing expedition, as long as you can survive at sea, you'll make it from here to there because of this dominant current called the trade current. Wind and current go together because if you blow across water, you'll move the water. So it's called the trade wind and it's called the trade current. They are overlapping. One above the ocean, one below the ocean. And Gabe, I'll be right with you, but I want to finish something. I want everyone to notice one other thing here. That in this one, given the rotation of the Earth, you should see that part. This is the biggest part of the donut. It's pushing the hardest. So water is displaced that way, and ta-da! Circular current in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, they circulate in the opposite direction. And these are the major oceanic currents. I'm sorry, I got to do another thing. That account for most of the ocean circulations, which is why we get surf from Alaska this way. And then our sailors can easily reach Hawaii. And from Hawaii, if you're going global, from Hawaii you go to Asia. And from Asia you go northward until you're pushed eastern. And then trade. And then, okay. The first question was Gabe?
Well, that was my question.
Peter?
I was just going to ask, whether that garbage patch.
Yeah, so the garbage patch is the dead spot in the middle. And by the way, the reporting on that has been kind of inflammatory. Most of the scientists who did the original research discouraged the public's panic about the garbage patches because they are a high concentration of garbage, but contrary to myth, you cannot see them from space. And if you're sailing right through them, you usually wouldn't know it. A highly elevated concentration of plastic is still mostly water, just a little extra plastic. But yeah, they're in the middle of these. Yeah, they're right there. The gyre in the middle. All the stuff is pushed to the center. Yeah.
From 30 to 60 degrees, and the wind is going up, so wouldn't it go like
the other way?
Yeah.
I was waiting. Yeah, it would, except this is a much stronger driver. If you could shut off this arrow, it would reverse.
Okay. But
remember that?
Like the displacement.
Yeah, it is the displacement of the water, and you've got to wonder which of these is going to win. This one's going to win because remember the Earth is a sphere? So the circle around the equator is a far larger distance to travel than the circle around 30. And so the most powerful force is the water this way, not the water that way. So this one drives those. I intentionally said it the wrong way, and I looked around to see if anybody would stop me. Thank you for jumping in. What else? Hey, so check it out. You remember I told you we're going to start with 4 simple rules. This accounts for the grasshopper effect we discussed in unit number... This also accounts for the pattern of biomes we discussed in unit 3. It explains the conquering of the Americas by Europeans. It explains why we get surf from Alaska and weather patterns coming from the north. If you look on there, you can see that the yellow arrows match roughly my arrows that were added today. And what else can I do to answer questions at this point? We're almost out of time.
Another photo of
Yeah.
all those cells.
This one?
Yeah. Are they like signed like that because of the Earth's rotation?
Right. And so here you see the polar, temperate, tropical, temperate, polar. But in this one, they've broken down the whole cell, kind of sheared it apart to represent the influence of the Earth's rotation within the cells. Yeah.
What happens if you're on a ship and you just sail right into the center of that? You just kind of.
Oh, so interesting little factoid. These are called doldrums in the ocean.
Okay.
If you're in the middle of this, you don't sail, bro.
You just like, damn it.
No, so the funny story is Charles Darwin could see the Galapagos, but he was right on the equator. And at the equator, these two currents technically often have a dead point. And so he was sitting there looking at the Galapagos. And there was like 2 weeks when they couldn't cover that last mile, lacking an external power source. Charles Darwin, I believe, went to go visit the Galapagos the first time via rowboat. And then the boat finally caught that unusual little burp of wind. And they're like, oh, here we go. They finally caught up to Darwin on his rowboat. So when the wind finally picked up, he had to leave the Galapagos before he really wanted to. He was very frustrated by that.
Okay.
Why is the temperate cell so
Why is the who's one right now? I think that is a function of what we were saying about the size of the donuts and the displacement of the shapes. You know, because it's a further ring around the equator than around the 30s. I think that might be enough.
But in the polar cell it's smaller.
Yeah, I don't know, bro. I've heard that this is much more accurate. So
yeah, that makes sense though. With like the surface area of the screen, down there, you're covering more this way.
Right. Yeah, so I think that if you scale this towards surface area, friction, and the reality of the situation, like more complete hydrodynamics, you get this. And by the way, there's all sorts of interesting details that are born of this. Like what happens when you have surface winds that will shear the interface between those two. You get hurricanes along the 30s usually. What else? I'm here to answer all of your questions.
You said the trash island's not that big of a deal. Do you notice if you're sailing through it? Like we've been told in other classes that it's like, you know, like a foot high.
Having never sailed through the gyres myself, I have no experience to speak from. I've heard from a lot of scientists that the trash island is not actually what you would consider an island. The first reporting I heard was you can get out of the boat and walk across the top.
Yeah.
Then I talked to the woman who wrote the research for the very first expedition that went out of San Francisco Bay. So I met her at my brother's party, and she was like, oh yeah, no, that's actually totally BS. The concentration of plastic has to be measured with scientific instruments, not the naked eye.
Oh wow. Yeah. I'm trying to find pictures of it, but I don't know what to believe.
And when you find a picture of floating garbage in the ocean, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an island of higher concentration.
Yeah. There's also just a lot of floating garbage in the ocean.
That's what she said. She's like, you know, every time somebody finds a pile of garbage in the ocean, they photograph it and go, here's the island. And it just so happens that's probably just the garbage that got dumped by a cruiser or where like a cargo container fell on the ship.
Yeah.